Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a sound that haunts the void between worlds. It is not the grinding of ancient machinery or the screaming of warp engines tearing through the fabric of reality. It is not the distant thunder of orbital bombardment or the crackling static of dying Vox channels. No, this sound is far more intimate, far more personal. It is the sound of a scream that has been stretched across hours, across days, across what feels like an eternity of unbroken suffering. And the thing that makes it truly unbearable, the detail that separates it from every other agony the galaxy has to offer, is that the one who screams has been kept alive through it all. Not out of mercy, not out of oversight, but because to the beings who inflict this suffering, the scream itself is nourishment. Welcome to the domain of the Drukhari. Yet in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no shortage of horror. The galaxy of the 41st Millennium is a place where entire worlds burn in the name of a corpse sitting on a golden throne, where legions of the dead march beneath alien stars, where gods of ruin whisper promises of damnation to anyone weak enough to listen. Every faction that walks this ruined galaxy carries with it some measure of dread. The Tyranids consume whole civilizations. The Necrons reduce worlds to silent tombs. The forces of chaos corrupt everything they touch with a sickness that runs deeper than flesh. And yet, among all of these terrors, among every nightmare that crawls through the blackness of space, there exists one species whose capacity for cruelty stands so far above the rest that even the most hardened veterans of the Imperium speak of them in hushed, trembling tones. The Dark Eldar, the Drukhari, the shadow dwellers of Komorach, the ones who do not come to conquer your world or claim your territory or convert your population to some dark creed. They come for something far simpler and far worse. They come for you. Specifically, they come for your pain, for your fear, for every drop of suffering your body and mind can produce before it finally, mercifully, breaks apart. And even then, they have the technology to put you back together and start the process all over again. So let us ask the question that sits at the heart of this story. Just how terrifying are the Dark Eldar really? But what makes them different from every other faction in this galaxy of endless war? To answer that, we need to go back to the very beginning, to a time before the Imperium, before the Space Marines, before even the Emperor walked among humanity. We need to go back to the fall of the greatest civilization the galaxy has ever known and understand what crawled out of its ashes. Settle in, get comfortable. This is going to be a long journey into the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and I promise you, by the end of it, you will understand why the Drukhari are not simply another faction in this setting. They are the thing that other factions have nightmares about. Before we can understand what the Dark Eldar became, we need to understand what they once were. And what they once were, believe it or not, was magnificent. Are millions of years before humanity had even learned to chip stone into tools. The Eldari, the ancient elven species from which the Drukhari descend, ruled the galaxy. And when I say ruled, I do not mean they controlled a few sectors or held dominion over a handful of star systems the way the Imperium does today. The Eldari Empire spanned the entire Milky Way. Their civilization was so advanced, so impossibly far beyond anything that has existed before or since, that the word empire barely begins to describe it. Think about this for a moment. The Imperium of Man, even at the height of its power during the Great Crusade, never fully controlled the galaxy. There were always pockets of resistance, always regions of space that remained unconquered. But the Eldari, their dominion was absolute. Their technology had reached a point where they could reshape planets on a whim. They could extinguish stars if they chose to. They had mastered the webway, that vast, labyrinthine network of tunnels that exists in the space between reality and the warp. And through it, they could travel instantaneously to any point in the galaxy without ever risking the dangers of warp travel. The Eldari mind is something that humans can barely comprehend. Their senses are sharper than anything a mortal could imagine, able to perceive levels of detail that would overwhelm a human brain. Their emotions burn with an intensity that makes human feelings seem like pale shadows by comparison. They are extraordinarily intelligent, their thought processes operating at speeds that dwarf those of any human, even an augmented one. Every sensation, every experience, every flicker of feeling is amplified in the Eldari mind to a degree that is almost impossible for us to fathom. This is important. Remember this detail, because it is the key to everything that follows. With their technology having eliminated the need for labor, for struggle, for any kind of hardship whatsoever, the Eldari found themselves with an embarrassment of time and no meaningful way to spend it. When you can reshape reality with a thought, when every material need is met before you even recognize it as a need, when death itself is merely a temporary inconvenience, what do you do with your days? What do you do with your centuries? The answer, as it turns out, was to seek pleasure. And at first, this was entirely benign. The Eldari created works of art that would make the greatest human masterpieces look like cave drawings. That they composed music that could move the listener to ecstasy or despair with a single note. They explored philosophy, mathematics, science, pushing the boundaries of knowledge in every conceivable direction. For a time, the pursuit of excellence in all things was enough. But time has a way of eroding even the most noble pursuits, and the Eldari had a very, very long time on their hands. Gradually, so gradually that no single generation could point to the moment it began, the pursuit of excellence became the pursuit of sensation. The pursuit of sensation became the pursuit of excess. And the pursuit of excess became something else entirely, something that had no name in any language, because no species had ever fallen so far, so thoroughly, into the abyss of its own desires. Yet the Eldari pleasure cults began as exclusive societies dedicated to exploring the outer boundaries of sensation. They experimented with drugs that could heighten perception to levels that bordered on the supernatural. They devised entertainments that grew progressively more extreme, more violent, more perverse. What had once been art became spectacle. What had once been spectacle became degradation. And what had once been degradation became something that defied description, acts so terrible that the very fabric of reality began to shudder under their weight. Because here is the thing about the Eldari that makes their fall so catastrophic. They are all latent psychers. Every single one of them possesses a connection to the warp, the dimension of pure psychic energy that underlies all of reality. And the warp, yes, as anyone who has studied the law of this universe knows, is not an empty void. It is a mirror. It reflects the emotions, the desires, the nightmares of every sentient being in the galaxy back at them with amplified force. And the Eldari, with their burning intensity and their galaxy-spanning numbers, were projecting something terrible into that mirror. For thousands of years, as the Eldari descended deeper and deeper into depravity, something began to stir in the warp. A consciousness, formless and hungry, started to coalesce from the collective psychic residue of their excess. It fed on their lusts, their cruelties, their obsessive pursuit of sensation at any cost. And with each passing century, as the behavior of the Eldari grew more extreme, this nascent entity grew stronger, more defined, more aware. Some of the Eldari saw what was coming. The Exodites, those who valued the old ways, fled to the edges of the galaxy and established rustic colonies on distant worlds, deliberately choosing hardship over comfort as a way of maintaining their spiritual discipline. The craft world Eldari, those who recognized the danger but were unwilling to abandon civilization entirely, constructed enormous world ships and sailed into the void, adopting rigorous paths of discipline to keep their passions in check. Even some of the Harlequins, the followers of the laughing god Sagorach, tried to warn their kin of the doom that approached. But in the heart of the empire, where the pleasure cults had grown so powerful that they effectively controlled Eldari society. No one was listening. Or rather, they were listening, and they simply did not care. Some of them even welcomed what was coming, believing that the birth of a god of pleasure could only be a good thing. How wrong they were. The moment of the fall arrived not with a whimper, but with a scream that tore across the galaxy like nothing before or since. On one terrible night, as the debauchery of the Eldari reached a final, impossible crescendo, the entity that had been growing in the warp for millennia suddenly snapped into full, terrible consciousness. Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, she who thirsts, the Dark Prince, was born. And with its first breath, it consumed them all. The psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth was so violent, so incomprehensibly powerful, that it tore a hole in the fabric of reality itself. The region of space where the heart of the Eldari Empire had stood, at an area spanning roughly 20,000 light-years, was consumed entirely. Real space and the warp merged into a single, screaming wound in the universe that would come to be known as the Eye of Terror. Billions upon billions of Eldari died in an instant, their souls ripped from their bodies and devoured by the newborn god. Even those who had fled, the Exodites on their distant worlds, the Craftworlders on their great ships, felt the pull of Slaanesh's hunger. Many of them fell dead where they stood, their spirits drawn into the warp, despite the vast distances that separated them from the epicenter. The Eldari gods fared no better. Slaanesh, gorged on the psychic energy of an entire species, turned its attention to the deities of the Eldari pantheon and consumed them one by one. Only two survived. Cain, the god of war, whose essence was shattered into fragments that scattered across the craft worlds, and Segorak, the laughing god, who was cunning enough to hide in the deepest recesses of the webway, where even Slaanesh could not reach. In the span of a single cosmic heartbeat, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known was reduced to ash and memory. The Eldari went from being the undisputed masters of creation to a scattered, dying species, hunted by a god that had been born from their own sins and would hunger for their souls for all eternity. But not all of the Eldari died, and not all of those who survived chose the path of redemption. In the webway, in the hidden spaces between reality and the warp, a city had existed for millennia before the fall. It had begun as a port, at a nexus point in the labyrinthine network of interdimensional tunnels that the Eldari used for travel and commerce. Its name was Komorach, and in the days of the Empire, it had been granted a unique status. Because it sat at the intersection of so many vital webway routes, Komorra had been deemed too important to fall under the jurisdiction of any single authority. It was granted autonomy, allowed to govern itself outside the reach of the Eldari councils. This was a mistake. Autonomy, in practice, meant that Komorra had no oversight, no rules, no one watching to make sure that the inhabitants behaved themselves. And so, naturally, it became a haven for those who wished to pursue their darkest desires without consequence. Pirates, slavers, hedonists of every description flocked to the port city, they drawn by the promise of absolute freedom. Over the centuries, Komorra grew fat on the trade of flesh and suffering, expanding outward into the webway like a cancer, absorbing other port cities, private estates, and satellite realms into its ever-growing mass. When the fall came, when Slaanesh's birth scream tore through the galaxy, the inhabitants of Komorra were shielded. The webway, existing as it does in the space between reality and the warp, provided a buffer against the worst of the psychic shockwave. While their kin in real space were consumed wholesale, the Eldari of Komorra survived. They felt the echoes of the catastrophe, felt the terrible pull of the newborn god reaching for their souls, but they endured. For a time, they might have taken this as a warning, but they might have looked at the devastation that their species' behavior had wrought and resolved to change their ways, as the Craftworlders had done. They might have chosen discipline over indulgence, restraint over excess, and slowly begun to rebuild something worth preserving from the ruins of their fallen empire. They did not. Instead, the Eldari of Komorragh looked at what had happened and drew an entirely different conclusion. If the birth of Slaanesh was the price of excess, then the solution was not to abandon excess, but to find a way to continue it without paying the price. And this is where the true horror of the Dark Eldar begins. You see, Slaanesh had not finished with the survivors. The newborn god maintained a claim on every Eldari soul in the galaxy, and that claim manifested as a slow, constant drain. The souls of the Eldari who dwelled in the webway were not consumed in one catastrophic instant, as those in real space had been, but they were being consumed, gradually and inexorably, like a candle flame slowly guttering in a draught. Without some means of replenishing what was being taken, every Eldari in Komorragh would eventually wither and die, their soul consumed by Slaanesh, condemned to an eternity of torment in the belly of a god born from their own depravity. The Craftworlders found their solution in discipline. By walking the rigid paths of the Asuryani, by controlling their emotions and channeling their passions into structured pursuits, they could slow the drain to a manageable level. Their spirit stones, crystalline matrices that could capture a dying Eldari's soul before Slaanesh could claim it. It provided a further layer of protection. It was an austere existence, stripped of the freedoms that the Eldari had once enjoyed, but it was an existence that preserved something of their dignity and their connection to one another. The Eldari of Komorragh found a very different solution. They discovered, through experimentation that one shudders to contemplate, that the drain on their souls could be temporarily halted, even reversed, through the suffering of others. When they inflicted pain, when they witnessed agony, when they bathed in the psychic emanations of a living being in the throes of torment, the void within them was briefly filled. Slaanesh's hunger was momentarily sated, or perhaps the stolen essence of the victim served to replenish what the Dark Prince had taken. The exact mechanism has never been fully understood, even by the Drukhari themselves. All they knew, all they needed to know, was that pain was the currency of their survival. And so the raids began. At first, the raids into real space were pragmatic affairs, focused on the capture of slaves who could be brought back to Komorragh and tormented at leisure. The Drukhari discovered that different species produced different qualities of suffering, different flavors of anguish that nourished them in different ways. Humans, with their relatively short lives and intense emotional responses, proved to be particularly satisfying. But the Drukhari did not limit themselves to humanity. Orcs, Tau, even other Eldari, on occasion, all fell victim to the raiding parties that emerged from the webway without warning, struck with devastating speed, and vanished with their captives before any meaningful defense could be mounted. Over the millennia, what had begun as a survival mechanism evolved into something far more elaborate. The Drukhari did not simply torture their captives because they had to. They tortured them because they had refined the act of inflicting suffering into an art form, a science, a philosophy. Pain was not merely a means of sustaining their souls. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. Every aspect of Drukhari society, from its politics to its entertainment to its economy, revolved around the acquisition and consumption of suffering. This is what makes them truly terrifying. Not just that they are cruel. Every faction in the 41st millennium is cruel in its own way. What makes the Drukhari different is that their cruelty is not a byproduct of their civilization. It is their civilization. Remove the suffering and Komorragh collapses. Remove the pain and the Drukhari die. They are a species for whom the torment of others is not merely tolerated or encouraged, but is, in the most literal sense possible, essential to their continued existence, and they have had 10,000 years to perfect it. To truly grasp the scope of the Drukhari threat, you need to understand the city from which they operate, because Komorragh is not merely a base of operations, it is a statement. It is a monument to everything the Dark Eldar represent, and its sheer scale is enough to give even the most jaded observer pause. When Imperial scholars first attempted to understand Komorrach, they made the mistake of thinking of it as a city in the conventional sense. They imagined a settlement, perhaps large by human standards, nestled somewhere in the webway. They were wrong in a way that is almost comical in its inadequacy. Komorrach is not a city. It is a dimension, a sprawling, impossible, interdimensional metropolis that makes even the largest of humanity's hive cities look like termite mounds by comparison. To understand why, you need to appreciate the nature of the webway itself. The webway is not a physical place in the way that a planet or a star system is a physical place. It exists in the space between reality and the warp, a network of tunnels and corridors that thread through dimensions that human minds are not equipped to fully comprehend. And Komorrach does not sit in one location within this network. It is spread across it, a loose collection of interconnected subrealms and satellite cities that span the entire galaxy. Picture it this way. Imagine that you could take 1,000 different cities, each one the size of a continent, and scatter them across the Milky Way, thousands of light years apart from one another. Now imagine that you could connect all of these cities with doorways that allow you to step from one to another instantaneously, as casually as you might walk from one room to the next. That is Komorrach. Its various districts and subrealms are separated by vast physical distances in the material universe. But within the webway, they are connected by portals that make those distances meaningless. The implications of this are staggering. Komorrach cannot be bombed. It cannot be besieged. Whereas it cannot be located on any star map, because it does not exist in any single location. Even if an invading force somehow managed to find and destroy one district of the Dark City, the remaining districts would continue to function, connected to one another by alternate pathways that route around the destroyed area. It would be like trying to kill a spider's web by cutting a single strand. The web remains. The spider remains. And the spider is watching. The Dark City is divided into several broad regions, each with its own character and its own horrors. High Komorrach is where the ruling elite dwell, the great archons and their cabals, surrounded by soaring spires of black crystal and structures of impossible architecture that defy the laws of physics as humanity understands them. It is here that the political games of the Drukhari play out, an endless dance of assassination, betrayal, alliance, and counter-betrayal that makes the most Machiavellian human court politics look like a children's game. The structures of High Komorrach are built at impossible angles, jutting outward over chasms of darkness, or spiraling upward in defiance of gravity. Because in the webway, such mundane concerns as structural integrity are merely suggestions. Towers of living bone rise alongside palaces of crystallized screams, and the air between them is filled with the constant traffic of anti-gravity vehicles, raiders, and venoms, and pleasure craft that weave between the spires at speeds that would be suicidal in any sane environment. Below High Komorrach lies the Middle Darkness, a lawless zone where the gangs of Hellions rule from their skyboards, racing through the foul air in great swarms that attack anything that moves. These skyboard-riding rebels are the delinquents of Drukhari society, too wild for the disciplined cabals, but too dangerous to ignore. They form their own power structures, their own hierarchies of violence, and they prey upon anyone foolish enough to venture into their territory without protection. Deeper still is the underworld, the domain of the homunculi, and it is here that the true nightmares of Komorrach are born. But we will speak of the homunculi in greater detail later, because they deserve their own chapter in this story. For now, it is enough to know that beneath the spires and the gangways and the racing skyboards, beneath everything that the citizens of Komorrach see and know, there exists a labyrinth of dungeons, laboratories, and flesh pits where the art of suffering has been refined to a degree that defies comprehension. Komorragh is powered by stolen suns. Read that sentence again, because it is not a metaphor. The Drukhari, using technology inherited from the height of the old Eldari Empire, have literally stolen stars from real space, ripping them from their orbits and dragging them into pocket dimensions within the webway. These captive suns, known as the Ilmea, or Black Suns, bathe the dark city in a perpetual crimson twilight, a bloody half-light that turns everything it touches into a vision from a fever dream. There is no day in Komorragh. There is no night. There is only the endless, ruddy glow of dying stars and the screams that fill the air like a constant, terrible music. The population of Komorragh is difficult to estimate with any accuracy, and the Drukhari themselves seem to take a perverse pleasure in keeping the numbers vague. But consider this. Before the fall, the Eldari Empire numbered in the trillions. The craft-worlders and exodites who escaped the fall represent a small fraction of the original population. The vast majority of those who survived the birth of Slaanesh were the ones already sheltering in the webway, and the webway's largest settlement was Komorragh. This suggests that the population of the Dark City could number in the billions, possibly even the tens of billions, though any figure is speculation. What is not speculation is the slave population. For every Drukhari citizen of Komorragh, there are untold numbers of slaves drawn from every species in the galaxy: humans, orcs, Tau, and even other Eldari who have been captured during raids on the craft worlds. These wretched beings live in conditions that defy description, kept alive through the perverse ministrations of the Homunculi, so that they can continue to provide the suffering that sustains their captors. Some have been in captivity for generations, born into slavery in the Dark City, knowing nothing of the worlds their ancestors once called home. And then there is the matter of Komorragh's defenses. Even if an enemy force could somehow locate a webway portal leading to the Dark City, even if they could somehow force their way through, they would find themselves facing a military machine of staggering proportions. Every cabal in Komorragh maintains its own private army. Every witch cult fields thousands of gladiatorial warriors. And every homunculi coven commands legions of twisted bioconstructs. And above all of them sits the cabal of the Black Heart, the largest and most powerful military organization in the Dark City, whose forces alone could match those of many Imperial sector fleets. Komorragh has been invaded before. Orcs have breached its defenses, drawn by some instinctive hunger for a good fight. Chaos demons have forced their way through weakened dimensional barriers. Even space marines have launched raids into the Dark City, albeit briefly and at terrible cost. Each time, the invaders have been repelled, absorbed, or simply overwhelmed by the sheer weight of Komorragh's defenders. The Dark City has endured for over 10,000 years, and it shows no signs of falling. This is the fortress from which the Drukhari launch their raids. Now, this is the lair to which they return with their screaming captives. And this is the place where those captives will learn, in the most intimate and terrible way possible, what it means to fall into the hands of the Dark Eldar. Now, to understand the military and social structure of the Drukhari, and therefore to understand the specific ways in which they are terrifying, we need to examine the three great pillars upon which their civilization rests. Each of these pillars represents a different expression of the Drukhari's fundamental nature, a different answer to the question of how best to extract suffering from the galaxy, and each is horrifying in its own distinct way. The first pillar is the Cabals. If you have ever heard a story about the Dark Eldar, if you have ever read an account of a Drukhari raid or listened to a survivor describe what happened to their world, chances are good that the attackers were Kabbalite warriors. The Cabals are the backbone of Drukhari society, the largest and most numerous of the Dark City's military organizations, and they are responsible for the vast majority of the raids that the Drukhari launch into real space. Think of them as a cross between a pirate fleet, a crime syndicate, and a military junta. and you begin to get close to the reality of what a cabal represents. Each cabal is led by an archon, a being of such refined cruelty and political cunning that survival alone is proof of their extraordinary capabilities. In Comora, advancement comes through one method and one method only. You kill the person above you and take their place. This is not a metaphor. This is not a figure of speech. If a Draken, a mid-ranking officer in a cabal, wishes to become an archon, they must literally assassinate the current archon and survive the inevitable counterplots that follow. If they succeed, they rule. If they fail, they die, and someone else takes their shot. This means that every archon who sits at the head of a cabal has survived decades, centuries, sometimes millennia of assassination attempts, poisonings, betrayals, and outright warfare from their own subordinates. The average archon has killed more of their own people than most imperial generals have killed enemies. They are masters of political intrigue, masters of personal combat, masters of every form of deception and manipulation that a species with millions of years of evolution can devise. And they are, as without exception, utterly without mercy. The rank and file of a cabal consists of Cabalite warriors, the standard soldiers of the Drukhari military machine. Do not let the word standard mislead you. A Cabalite warrior is a being who has been fighting and killing since before most humans were born. Their reflexes are faster than any unaugmented human can match. Their senses are sharper, their minds quicker. They are armed with splinter weapons, rifles and pistols that fire shards of psychoactive crystal that dissolve on contact with flesh, delivering a payload of virulent toxins directly into the victim's bloodstream. These toxins are not designed to kill quickly. They are designed to incapacitate, to paralyze, to keep the victim alive and conscious while the Drukhari close in to take them captive. For heavier targets, vehicles and fortifications and the occasional particularly well-armored opponent, the cabals employ darklight weaponry. Darklight is an energy source so exotic and so dangerous that imperial scientists can barely begin to understand it. It is believed to be harvested from black holes, from warp storms, from the most violent and destructive phenomena in the universe. When concentrated and focused through a weapon like a dark lance or a blaster, darklight does not merely damage its target, it annihilates it. The beam tears through armor, regardless of thickness or composition, and anything caught in its path is simply erased from existence. There is no explosion, no firestorm. The target is simply gone, as if it had never been. The cabals ride to war aboard raiders, sleek anti-gravity skimmers that are the signature vehicle of the Drukhari. A raider is not a transport in the way that a chimera or a rhino is a transport. It has no armor to speak of. It has no enclosed compartment to protect its passengers. Instead, it is an open-topped platform of bladed metal designed to carry its warriors at breakneck speed directly into the heart of the enemy formation. The Drukhari who ride these craft do so standing, hanging from barbed handholds and trophy hooks, utterly exposed to enemy fire, and they do not care. Speed is their armor. By the time an enemy has registered the raider's presence, identified it as a threat, and brought their weapons to bear, the Drukhari have already disembarked and are among them, blades flashing and splinter weapons hissing. This is the preferred method of Drukhari warfare. Arrive without warning, strike with overwhelming force. Take as many captives as possible and vanish before the enemy can mount a coordinated response. A Drukhari raid is not a battle in the conventional sense. It is a kidnapping on an industrial scale, carried out with a speed and precision that borders on the supernatural. Imperial forces have reported entire hive city districts being emptied of their population in the span of hours, with nothing left behind but bloodstains and the fading echoes of screams. The largest and most powerful of all the cabals is the Cabal of the Black Heart, ruled by a being whose name is spoken with fear and reverence throughout Comarach and beyond. His name is Astrobael Vecht, and he is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most dangerous individuals in the entire galaxy. Vect was not born to power, he was born a slave. The lowest of the low in Drukhari society. A half-born, grown in the amniotic vats of the homunculi rather than naturally conceived, he was considered barely a step above the alien captives who toiled in Komorach's slave pits. By every metric of the Dark City's rigid hierarchy, he should have lived and died in obscurity, another nameless drone in the vast machinery of suffering. Instead, he did something unprecedented. Through a combination of cunning, ruthlessness, and sheer will that defies easy description, Vect clawed his way up from slavery to become the single most powerful being in the Dark City. He founded the Cabal of the Black Heart, the first organization to openly call itself a cabal, and used it as a weapon to systematically dismantle the old aristocracy that had ruled Komorach since before the fall. As his methods were breathtaking in their audacity. At one point, he deliberately provoked an invasion of Komorach by the Imperium of Man, capturing a Space Marine strike cruiser belonging to the Salamanders chapter and allowing it to be tracked back to the Webway. When Imperial forces stormed into the Dark City, Vect maneuvered his enemies among the Drukhari nobility into the path of the vengeful Space Marines, allowing the humans to do his dirty work for him. The noble houses were destroyed, and Vect emerged from the chaos as the undisputed ruler of Komorach. He claims to have witnessed the fall of the Eldari firsthand, which, if true, would make him over 10,000 years old, one of the oldest mortal beings in the galaxy. Whether this claim is accurate is impossible to verify. Since Vect is the only being ancient enough to confirm or deny it, and he is not known for his honesty. What can be said with certainty is that he has maintained his grip on Komorach for thousands of years, surviving every assassination attempt, every coup, every challenge to his authority, with a cunning that some have compared to the chaos god Tzeentch himself. Vect's rule is absolute. The Cabal of the Black Heart controls more webway routes than any other organization in Komorach, and it exacts a tithe of slaves and souls from every other Cabal that uses the portals under its control. Its pirate fleet is the largest of any Cabal. Its military forces number in the hundreds of thousands, and its network of spies and informants reaches into every level of Komorite society. Coupled with a formal alliance with the witch cult of Strife, as one of the most powerful gladiatorial organizations in the Dark City, Vect wields more raw power than several of his largest rivals combined, and he is not content to simply maintain his position. Vect is a schemer on a scale that is difficult to comprehend, always planning several moves ahead, always looking for ways to expand his influence and eliminate potential threats before they materialize.
Now, I just want to take a quick second here to just give you my personal take on all of this, because honestly, this is one of the reasons I love covering 40k lore so much. The Drukhari to me are hands down the most underrated faction in the entire setting. Everyone talks about chaos or the Tyranids when it comes to scary factions, and yeah, those are terrifying in their own right, but nothing in this universe unsettles me the way the Dark Eldar do. And I think it's because their horror is so personal. They're not some mindless swarm or a cosmic force of nature. They're intelligent, they're deliberate, and they chose this. That's what gets under my skin every single time I dig into their lore. They make the Grimdark feel earned. But anyways, that's just my take on it. Let's go back to the video.
He has orchestrated events that have shaken the very foundations of Komorach, including the catastrophic disjunction that followed the partial awakening of the Eldari god of the dead, Iniad, an event that saw the Dark City torn apart by demonic incursions and civil war. Even this near apocalypse served Vect's purposes. He feigned his own death, allowed his enemies to reveal themselves, and then orchestrated their destruction in a spectacle of breathtaking brutality, emerging from the chaos with his power not diminished but enhanced, having declared himself a living dark muse, his position unassailable. When Vect takes the field personally, which is rare, he rides aboard his dais of destruction, a modified Ravager gunship equipped with unique force fields and weapon systems that are the product of technologies so advanced that even the Mechanicus would weep to understand them. He wields the scepter of the Dark City, an ornate staff that contains sophisticated pain inducers capable of reducing any living being to a quivering wreck with a touch. And obsidian orbs, mysterious soul technology devices that heal Vect by feeding on the terror of those around him. This is the being who sits at the apex of Drukhari society. On a slave who became a king, a politician who weaponized invasions, a strategist who makes gods nervous. And he is merely the most prominent example of the kind of mind that the Cabals produce. Every Archon in Camorra is, in their own way, a smaller reflection of Vect's genius, a being whose entire existence is devoted to the acquisition of power and the infliction of suffering. But the Cabals, for all their menace, are only one pillar of the Drukhari war machine. The second pillar is something altogether different, something that turns the act of killing into a performance. The witch cults of Camorra exist because of a simple truth about Drukhari society. Without a sanctioned outlet for their population's hunger for suffering, the citizens of the Dark City would tear each other apart. As the Drukhari need pain the way humans need food and water. It is a literal biological imperative, driven by the slow drain of their souls by Slaanesh. Without a regular supply of anguish to consume, an individual Drukhari will begin to wither, aging rapidly as their soul is gradually leached away until nothing remains but an empty, desiccated husk. The Archons of the Great Cabals understood early on that if this hunger were allowed to express itself freely, Camorra would collapse into anarchy within a generation. There needed to be a mechanism, a controlled release, a way for the citizens of the Dark City to feed without resorting to constant internecine warfare. And so the witch cults arose. Organizations of gladiatorial fighters who stage nightly performances of extreme violence in the massive arenas that dot the upper reaches of Camorra. Think of the Roman Colosseum, and then imagine that comparison is an insult. The arenas of the witch cults are architectural masterpieces that would make the greatest human amphitheaters look like muddy pits. They are multi-leveled structures of razor-edged crystal and dark metal, bristling with barbed stages upon which thousands of warriors and slaves meet gruesome ends each night. The spectators observe from ornate thrones or from anti-gravity pleasure craft that drift above the carnage, close enough to feel the spray of blood and the psychic emanation of suffering, feeding upon it like diners at a feast. The performances themselves defy easy categorization, as some are straightforward combat displays, pitting Wyches against captured aliens, beasts, or each other in duels that range from the intimate to the epic in scale. Others are more creative, aerial ballets of bloodletting staged in zero-gravity environments, or carefully curated menageries of exotic predators set loose among clusters of terrified slaves. Still others are more esoteric, incorporating hazards like spinning blade walls, gravity wells, kinetic inversion snares, and traps that the audience can activate at will, adding an element of interactive participation to the slaughter. But regardless of the format, all witch cult performances share one common element. By the end of each local night, the arena is slick with blood and viscera, and the citizens of Camorra have fed well on the suffering that was so artfully provided. The witches themselves are among the most deadly hand-to-hand combatants in the galaxy. They train from birth in the art of personal combat, honing their reflexes, their agility, and their killing instinct to a razor edge. A witch in full flow is a thing of terrible beauty, a blur of movement and flashing blades that most enemies cannot even track with their eyes, let alone defend against. They use a bewildering variety of close combat weapons, from elegant daggers and punch daggers to weighted flails, shard nets, impalers, and the exotic hydra gauntlets, each one designed not merely to kill, but to do so in the most visually spectacular way possible. Most witches are female, for the Drukhari have found that women are more often able to attain the pinnacle of poise and grace that the arena demands. Though male witches exist and serve their own roles within the cults, regardless of gender, all witches are obsessed with their appearance. They enter combat dressed with as much aesthetic care as if they were meeting a lover, wearing form-fitting witch suits that are designed to be both beautiful and functional, offering minimal protection in favor of maximum freedom of movement. Many enhance their performance with cocktails of combat drugs that heighten their speed, strength, and aggression to superhuman levels, though the most skilled among them disdain such enhancements as a sign of weakness. The witch cults are ruled by the succubi, the so-called brides of death. These are warriors of such extraordinary skill and physical perfection that they have become living icons, celebrities in the most literal sense of the word. Every succubus is famed across Comorac for the precision and artistry of her kills. Their every motion is mesmerizing, a serpentine grace that can hypnotize even the most disciplined observer as they flow toward their victims like living works of art. A succubus will go to any length to maintain her beauty, including feeding dozens of lesser warriors to gruesome deaths before entering the arena, consuming their fear and anguish to rejuvenate herself and present a more youthful, more captivating appearance to the crowd. Traditionally, each witch cult is ruled by 3 succubi, though only one truly holds power, while the other 2 compete for dominance through increasingly spectacular displays of killing. Competition among the succubi is fierce and direct, where archons prefer the twist of the political knife. Succubi resolve their disputes through artful decapitation, settling their rivalries in the arena where the crowds can witness and judge the outcome. The most famous of all the succubi is Lilith Hesperax, known across the galaxy as the Queen of Blades. Lilith is the undisputed champion of the gladiatorial arenas, a warrior of such transcendent skill that she occupies a unique place in Drukhari society. There are recorded instances of Lilith fighting as many as 10 opponents simultaneously without receiving a single scratch. Her preferred combat dress is deliberately provocative, exposing as much bare skin as possible and wearing her floor-length hair loose, all to taunt her opponents into attacking and to heighten the spectacle for the audience. Unlike most witches, Lilith disdains the use of combat drugs entirely, as considering them a crutch for the untalented. She fights with nothing but simple knives, relying on pure speed and skill to overcome any opponent. On the battlefields of the 41st Millennium, she is considered virtually unmatched in single combat, a blur of blade and shadow that can carve through space marines, orc war bosses, and tyrannid bioconstructs with equal ease. In more recent times, Lilith has aligned herself with the Inari, the followers of the newly awakened Eldari god of the dead, though her motivations appear to be characteristically self-serving. It is said that she seeks to capture Lucius the Eternal, the Chaos Space Marine champion of Slanesh, who cannot be permanently killed, believing that a duel with such a being would be the greatest spectacle Comorac has ever witnessed. Else the witch cults bring a particular terror to the Drukhari raids on real space, because they transform the battlefield into an arena. Where the Kabbalite warriors are efficient and methodical, the witches are theatrical, turning every engagement into a performance of lethal grace. They do not simply fight their enemies, they dance around them, toying with their victims, prolonging the engagement to extract the maximum amount of suffering and the maximum amount of entertainment for themselves and their sisters. An Imperial soldier facing Kabbalite warriors is in a fight for their life. An Imperial soldier facing witches is an unwilling participant in a show, and the audience is hungry. And yet, for all the horror of the Cabals and the witch cults, they pale in comparison to the third pillar of Drukhari society. Because the true masters of suffering in Comorac do not live in the gleaming spires of High Comorac or the blood-soaked arenas of the witch cults. They live in the darkness below. There is a level of Comorac that even the other Drukhari fear. Beneath the spires and the gangways, beneath the racing skyboards and the nightly spectacles of the arena, there exist labyrinths of dungeons and laboratories and chambers of such unspeakable purpose that even the most hardened Kabbalite warrior prefers not to think about them too closely. This is the domain of the Homunculi, and it is here, in the lowest depths of the Dark City, that the art of suffering reaches its most refined and terrible expression. The Homunculi are flesh sculptors. That phrase, simple as it sounds, and contains within it an ocean of horror that would take lifetimes to fully plumb. These are beings who have dedicated centuries, sometimes millennia, to the study and practice of manipulating living flesh. They can reshape a body the way a potter reshapes clay, rewriting the fundamental biology of their subjects to create whatever form their twisted imagination desires. They can graft additional limbs onto a torso, merge two separate beings into a single screaming organism, or slowly and methodically peel away everything that makes a person who they are, layer by layer, until nothing remains but a vehicle for pain. But the homunculi do not consider themselves torturers. That word, they would argue, is far too crude to describe what they do. They consider themselves artists. The highest art, they proclaim, is the infliction of pain, and they pursue it with the dedication and passion of the most devoted human sculptor or musician. A homunculus does not simply hurt their victims. They compose symphonies of agony, carefully orchestrated progressions of suffering that build and swell and crescendo like a piece of music, each note of pain precisely calibrated to produce the maximum emotional impact on both the victim and the audience. The covens to which they belong are self-governing organizations that operate beneath the political structures of the cabals and the witch cults, occupying a unique and indispensable niche in Drukhari society. Each coven is housed in a vast domain of cells and laboratories whose architecture itself seems designed to inspire dread. Some take the form of labyrinths of mirrors, yet where victims can see their own transformations reflected endlessly back at them. Others are spiral-edged pits with narrow, twisting walkways that wind down into darkness. Some are literally constructed from living flesh, entire towers grown from the bodies of those who defied the coven, their screams woven into the very walls. The homunculi themselves are ancient. So ancient, in fact, that many of them have ceased to resemble the Eldari from which they descended. Over the centuries, they have modified their own bodies with the same techniques they apply to their victims, adding extra limbs, additional sensory organs, and strange appendages whose purposes are known only to themselves. A typical homunculus is a gaunt, elongated figure that moves with an unsettling spider-like grace, draped in coats of flayed skin and hung with the tools of their trade, bladed implements, syringes of exotic poisons, and devices whose functions are best left unimagined. They consider themselves above the petty concerns of the physical world, and most refuse to debase themselves by touching the ground, let alone engaging in physical labor. Instead, they float on exotic anti-gravity technologies, or are carried by their servants, attended at all times by an entourage of the twisted creatures they have created. These servants, the racks and grotesques that form the rank and file of a homunculi coven's military forces, are themselves products of the flesh sculptor's art, beings who were once ordinary Drukhari or captured aliens but have been transformed into something else entirely. The racks are the most common of these creations. Yet they serve as both laboratory assistants and soldiers, their bodies modified to withstand punishment that would kill a normal being, their minds conditioned to absolute obedience. They are the hands that hold the instruments when the homunculus is at work, the guards that stand watch over the dungeons, the soldiers that march to war when the covens are called upon to fight. They are eerily silent and unsettlingly uniform, their individuality stripped away, along with whatever they were, before the homunculus took an interest in them. The grotesques are something else entirely. These are massive, hulking creatures, towering constructs of twisted flesh and grafted muscle that lumber into battle with the mindless fury of beasts. They are built from the remains of multiple victims, their bodies assembled from the most durable components of several different organisms, stitched and grown and fused together into something that bears only the faintest resemblance to any natural life form. Some retain fragments of consciousness from their constituent parts, scraps of memory and personality that surface occasionally in howls of confused rage. Most are simply engines of destruction, driven by pain and directed by the will of their homunculus master. But the true horrors created by the homunculi are the engines of pain. These are the pinnacle of the flesh sculptor's art. Hybrid constructs that blur the line between organism and machine, bristling with torture devices, syringes of deadly toxins, and weapons designed to inflict maximum suffering while keeping the victim alive for as long as possible. But the Talos pain engine is the most commonly encountered of these, a floating construct of bladed metal and living tissue that glides into battle with a grace that belies its size. Its arms end in massive claws and cutting tools that can dissect a victim with surgical precision even in the chaos of combat. And its internal systems are designed to harvest the suffering of those it kills, feeding it directly back to the homunculus who created it. The Kronos parasite engine serves a different but equally terrible purpose. Rather than harvesting physical pain, the Kronos feeds on the spiritual essence of its victims, draining their very soul stuff and distributing it among nearby Drukhari to sustain them. Yet the Kronos on the battlefield is surrounded by an aura of spiritual hunger that can sap the will to fight from even the most courageous warrior, and its touch brings a cold, creeping weakness that goes far deeper than the physical. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the homunculi is not what they can destroy, but what they can create. The homunculi are the masters of Komorok's regenerative technologies, and it is this mastery that gives them their true power. When a high-ranking Drukhari is killed in battle or assassinated in the endless political games of the Dark City, it is the homunculi who can bring them back to life. The corpse is brought to the Coven's laboratories and installed in a regeneration pod, suspended above the torture tables where a victim is strapped down and subjected to carefully calibrated agonies. Yes, the dying Drukhari feeds on the cascade of suffering from below, their body slowly reconstituting itself. First the skeleton, then muscle and sinew, and finally the pale alabaster skin that the Drukhari are known for. This process is not a gift freely given. It comes at a price, and that price is steep. Each time a homunculus brings a Drukhari back from the dead, they take a permanent portion of the patient's soul for themselves, for purposes that the patient is better off not knowing. They also demand payment in slaves, the currency of Komorok, and the arrangement must be made in advance. A Drukhari who has not established a relationship with a homunculus before their death is out of luck. There is no charity in the Dark City. This means that the homunculi hold a form of power that transcends politics and military strength. Yes, they hold the power of life and death itself. Every archon, every succubus, every warrior of rank and ambition in Komorok is, on some level, dependent on the homunculi for their continued existence. This dependency gives the Covens an influence that reaches into every corner of the Dark City, and it ensures that no matter how the balance of power shifts among the cabals and the witch cults, the homunculi remain indispensable. There are several known covens in Komorok, each with its own specialty and its own particular brand of horror. The Prophets of Flesh, led by the ancient and utterly insane homunculus Urian Rakath, specialize in the transformation of non-Drukhari species into grotesques and other bioconstructs. They have demonstrated a particular interest in the Tau, whose relative naivety and intense physical responses to pain make them especially satisfying subjects. The Coven of the 13 Scars is notable for its Tower of Flesh, a stronghold in Komorok that is literally a living organism, grown from the bodies of those who defied the Coven. It is whispered that even Fabius Bile, the notorious Chaos Space Marine and self-proclaimed master of genetic manipulation, once studied under the homunculi of the 13 Scars, and that whatever he learned in that terrible place shaped the course of his own twisted experiments for millennia to come. The homunculi have also developed entire philosophical disciplines around their craft. The Nemesines seek to discover the most efficient ways to kill every creature in the galaxy, while their more advanced practitioners, the Ever-Nemesines, have moved beyond the mere killing of physical beings to the extermination of concepts. They seek to kill hope itself, to erase joy from entire sectors of space, to assassinate the very idea of progress and enlightenment across the galaxy. The Nadirists embrace depravity as an end in itself, seeking to become gods not through the creation of powerful servants, but by becoming the living embodiment of pure evil. The Scarlet Epicureans are perhaps the closest spiritual descendants of the pleasure cults that caused the fall, pursuing sensation for its own sake with a single-mindedness that approaches religious devotion. And then there is the most terrifying capability of all. The homunculi have learned to transcend death entirely. Through their twisted soul science, they have developed the ability to leave small portions of their essence in rune-carved caskets and extra-dimensional pockets, so that even if their physical body is completely destroyed, vaporized, reduced to its component atoms, they can inhabit new flesh and return. For a homunculus to be truly killed, they must be annihilated both physically and spiritually, a feat that is extraordinarily difficult to achieve, since the soul fragments they have scattered across Komorak's hidden spaces are almost impossible to locate, let alone destroy. This means that the homunculi are, for all practical purposes, immortal, not merely long-lived as all Eldari are, but genuinely unkillable by any conventional means. They have walked the dungeons of Komorak for thousands of years, slowly perfecting their art, as slowly accumulating knowledge and power, and there is nothing in the galaxy that can permanently end them. Even other Drukhari fear them, and with good reason. A being who cannot be killed and whose entire existence is devoted to the refinement of suffering is not something that any sane creature wants as an enemy. This is the third pillar of the Drukhari war machine. The Cabals strike fast and hard, the witch cults turn killing into performance art, and the homunculi covens ensure that the real horror begins only after the battle is over. Together, they form a civilization that is uniquely, specifically, and deliberately designed to inflict the maximum possible amount of suffering on the rest of the galaxy. And we have not yet discussed the worst of it. Let us talk about what actually happens during a Drukhari raid, not in the abstract, not in the sanitized language of Imperial tactical reports, but in the lived experience of the people who are on the receiving end. Because it is in the execution of a raid that the full horror of the Drukhari becomes apparent, and it is a horror that operates on every level simultaneously: physical, psychological, and spiritual. A Drukhari raid begins long before the first portal opens. Weeks, or even months in advance, the target world will be scouted by mandrakes, those nightmare creatures that exist simultaneously in the material world and some other, darker dimension. Mandrakes are among the most feared beings in Komorra, and that is saying something in a city where fear is the default emotion. They are creatures of living shadow, beings who were once Drukhari but have been transformed, or through means that even the homunculi do not fully understand, into something that exists halfway between flesh and darkness. Their bodies absorb light. Their skin is night black, covered in blasphemous runes that seem to writhe and shift when observed directly. Their faces are not fixed, features flowing and changing like smoke, occasionally revealing a mouth full of sharp teeth or eyes that burn with a cold, hungry light. They can travel through shadows, emerging from the darkness of any place where light does not reach, materializing behind their targets with a sibilant hiss, before striking with claws and blades that carry the chill of a dimension where warmth has never existed. The mandrakes inhabit a region of Komorra called Elindrak, a district that exists in more than one dimension simultaneously. In Elindrak, their shadows are alive. They thicken and writhe like living things, flowing into one another, reaching for anyone who ventures into their domain. It is rumored that somewhere in Elindrak lies a portal to an entire world of shade demons, entities that can freeze a soul with a touch. The mandrakes themselves may be descendants of a forbidden Eldari cult that found a way to pass into this shadow realm to escape the fall, or they may be the product of unholy unions between Eldari and demonic entities during the heights of pre-fall depravity. No one knows for certain, and the mandrakes themselves are not telling. What is known is their lethality. Even the other Drukhari fear them. They strike from shadows with a strength more commonly associated with orcs than Eldari, their glimmer steel blades extracting maximum pain from their victims, while their bodies channel the stolen life energies into blasts of cold fire that freeze their targets in place. Their services can be hired by archons for raids, though their price is steep and often strange. Sometimes they demand slaves. Sometimes they demand a treasured memory, a heartbeat, a true and secret name, or some other esoteric payment that only the mandrakes understand the value of. And they wear clothing made from the flayed skins of those who have broken agreements with them, which tends to ensure that their clients pay promptly. The most feared of all mandrakes is Kera Druak, known as the Decapitator. This four-armed, hollow-eyed hunter has stalked the shadows of Komaruk since at least the time of the Horus Heresy, 10,000 years ago. His lair is lined with hundreds, possibly thousands of skulls, each one claimed from a victim somewhere in the galaxy. He hunts with inhuman patience, sometimes tracking a single target for decades across a dozen worlds, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Each skull is judged against some unknown criterion, and those that do not meet his standards are smashed to pieces. Those that do are added to a hemispherical wall of niches, each skull positioned to stare at a single point above a central dais. When the final skull was placed, Karadruak opened a portal to the Midnight Dimension, the shadow realm of the mandrakes, spilling its denizens into Komorach in a flood of living darkness. These are the scouts that precede a Drukhari raid. Imagine being an Imperial citizen on a frontier world, going about your daily business, and never knowing that in the shadow beneath your bunk, in the darkness under the stairs, in the pool of blackness behind the hab block generator, something is watching you, counting you, assessing how much suffering you are worth. When the raid itself begins, it comes without warning. The first sign is a light in the sky, a shimmering, viridian glow that unfolds and spirals outward into a multi-dimensional portal that blazes with green flame. Through this gateway come dozens, sometimes hundreds, of bladed anti-gravity assault craft, angling downward toward the surface at speeds that should be impossible. The raiders come first, their decks crowded with Kabbalite warriors whose splinter weapons are already tracking targets. Behind them come the Venoms, smaller and faster, carrying squads of witches whose eyes gleam with anticipation. And behind them, floating on invisible currents of anti-gravity, come the grotesque shapes of the Homuncules war engines, Talos and Kronos constructs that glide through the air with a grace that belies their monstrous forms. The attack is coordinated with a precision that Imperial military commanders find deeply unsettling. Despite the notorious treachery of Drukhari society, where betrayal is practically a form of greeting, the warriors of a real space raid display an uncharacteristic cooperation and discipline. This is because the stakes are too high for the usual backstabbing. A raid that fails produces no slaves, no suffering, and no sustenance for the participants. Personal rivalries are put aside, at least until the raid is complete and the spoils are being divided. The Drukhari do not fight the way that most military forces fight, and they do not seek to hold ground or destroy enemy formations or achieve strategic objectives in the way that Imperial planners understand those terms. They fight to capture. Every weapon, every tactic, every element of their military doctrine is oriented toward taking prisoners alive and relatively intact. This does not mean they cannot kill. They are devastatingly effective killers when they choose to be, and any enemy that stands between them and their objective will be eliminated with ruthless efficiency. But the killing is a means to an end. The end is always the same: captives. Splinter weapons, the standard armament of Kabbalite warriors, are specifically designed for this purpose. The crystalline shards they fire deliver a payload of neurotoxins that paralyzes the victim, leaving them conscious but unable to move. A warrior hit by splinter fire does not die. They fall, unable to move, unable to fight, unable even to scream, but fully aware of what is happening as the Drukhari step over their bodies. collecting those judged worthy of transport back to the Dark City. The Witchers prefer a more hands-on approach. They leap from their transports into the midst of the enemy, their combat drugs singing through their veins, and engage in a whirlwind of close combat that is as much performance as it is battle. They do not simply overpower their opponents. They play with them, drawing out each engagement, testing the limits of their victim's courage and skill before delivering the final, precise strike that leaves them wounded but alive. A witch who kills her opponent outright before extracting the maximum entertainment from the encounter is considered to have failed in her art. The Reavers, jet bike-mounted warriors who serve as the fast attack element of many raids, use a particularly sadistic technique. They streak across the battlefield at impossible speeds, dragging blades and caltrops beneath their vehicles that tear through enemy infantry like a saw through soft wood. The injuries they inflict are deliberate, designed to maim rather than kill, leaving their victims writhing on the ground, their screams providing a feast of suffering for the Drukhari who follow in their wake. Throughout all of this, the Drukhari are feeding. As the pain and terror of the battlefield wash over them, they absorb it, drinking in the psychic emanations of suffering like connoisseurs savoring a fine vintage. The phenomenon known as power from pain is both a literal and metaphorical description of what happens during a raid. As the battle progresses, as the suffering intensifies, the Drukhari grow stronger, faster, more resilient. Their wounds heal faster. Their reflexes sharpen. Their already formidable combat prowess increases to levels that seem almost supernatural. By the late stages of a raid, a Drukhari warrior who was already a match for any human soldier has become something approaching unstoppable, their bodies surging with stolen vitality. And then, as quickly as it began, the raid is over. The portals open again, the green fire blazes, and the Drukhari vanish back into the webway with their screaming cargo. The whole affair, from first strike to final withdrawal, may have lasted only a few hours. In that time, an entire settlement may have been stripped of its population. Thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of people, taken alive, loaded onto the decks of raiders and into the cargo holds of larger transport vessels, destined for a fate that makes death look like a mercy. The Imperial response, when it comes at all, arrives to find empty buildings and blood-stained streets. No enemy to fight, no army to engage, just silence and the fading echo of screams. Military intelligence officers will spend weeks analyzing the attack, trying to understand the enemy's tactics, searching for a pattern that might predict the next strike. They will find nothing useful because the Drukhari do not operate according to any strategic logic that humans can comprehend. They do not raid to acquire territory or resources or military advantage. Yet they raid because they are hungry, and the galaxy is their larder. Now we come to the part of this story that is hardest to tell. The part that Imperial records refer to in heavily redacted documents marked with the highest levels of classification. The part that survivors, those vanishingly rare individuals who somehow escape the Dark City, speak of only in fragments, between the nightmares that never quite stop and the shaking hands that never quite steady. What happens to the captives? When the raiding party returns to Komarach, the captives are divided according to a hierarchy of suffering that is as complex and formalized as any imperial bureaucracy. Those judged to be of the highest quality, the strongest, the most willful, the ones whose capacity for suffering is greatest, such are claimed by the Archons and the Homunculi for their personal use. These are the ones who will endure the longest and suffer the most, their torment stretched across years, sometimes decades, by the regenerative technologies of the covens. The next tier of captives is distributed among the cabals and the witch cults, to be used as raw material for the arena, or as slaves in the various industries of the Dark City. Some will be forced to fight in the gladiatorial pits, pitted against other captives, against exotic beasts, or against witches, who will use them as practice targets and entertainment for the crowds. Others will be put to work in the workshops and forges of the Dark City, laboring under conditions that would be considered nightmarish by the standards of even the most brutal imperial forge world. The lowest tier, as those deemed to be of the least value, are simply thrown into the slave pits, vast open-air enclosures in the lower levels of Komorach, where captives from 100 different worlds and a dozen different species are crammed together in conditions of indescribable squalor. Here, the weak are preyed upon by the strong, the sick are left to die where they fall, and the only escape is madness or the merciful release of the arena, where at least the end comes quickly. But it is the fate of the highest value captives that truly defines the Drukhari as a species. These individuals are taken to the oubliettes of the Homunculi, the dungeons beneath Komorach, where the art of suffering is practiced at its most refined. What happens in those dungeons is difficult to describe in terms that convey the reality of the experience. Because the Homunculi have access to technologies and techniques that allow them to inflict levels of suffering that the human mind can barely conceptualize. The Homunculi can keep a victim alive indefinitely, regardless of the injuries inflicted upon them. They can regenerate damaged tissue, restart failed organs, and maintain consciousness through levels of trauma that would kill a normal being 100 times over. This means that the suffering can be prolonged far beyond any natural limit. A captive in a homunculus's dungeon does not have the option of dying. Death is a luxury that is denied to them until their captor has extracted every last drop of agony that their body and mind can produce. The techniques employed are as varied as they are horrible. Some homunculi favor physical methods, i.e. the slow and methodical application of pain through cutting, burning, stretching, and other forms of bodily harm that are applied with surgical precision to the areas of the body most sensitive to pain. Others prefer psychological approaches, using sensory deprivation, hallucination-inducing drugs, or the manipulation of the victim's memories and emotions to create states of terror and despair that are even more nourishing than physical agony. The most accomplished homunculi combine both approaches, crafting experiences of suffering that operate on every level simultaneously: physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual. They can modify the victim's nervous system to make them more sensitive to pain, amplifying every sensation 1,000-fold. They can graft additional nerve clusters onto the body, while creating new pathways for agony to travel. They can alter the brain's chemistry to prevent the natural numbing effect that normally sets in during prolonged suffering, ensuring that the victim experiences every moment of their ordeal at full intensity, from beginning to end. And the most terrible thing, the detail that separates the homunculi from every other practitioner of cruelty in the galaxy, is that they can put you back together afterward. No matter what they do to you, no matter how thoroughly they disassemble your body or shatter your mind, they can restore you to your original state, whole and healthy and ready for the next session. This means that the suffering is not merely prolonged but cyclical. There is no natural endpoint, no point at which the body gives out and the ordeal is over. It simply begins again and again. And again, for as long as the homunculus retains interest in their subject. Some captives endure for decades in the dungeons of the homunculi. There are accounts, fragmentary and unverified, but persistent enough to be taken seriously, of individuals who have been held in the dark city for centuries, their bodies rebuilt and broken and rebuilt again so many times that they have lost all sense of identity, all memory of who they were before, reduced to nothing but a vehicle for pain. They are no longer people in any meaningful sense. They are instruments, played by the homunculi in their endless symphony of agony. This is the fate that awaits every being taken alive by the Drukhari. Not a quick death on the battlefield, not imprisonment or forced labor or even conventional slavery, but an eternity of suffering, or administered by beings who have spent millennia perfecting the art of making it worse, in a city that feeds on your screams the way a human feeds on bread. This is why the Drukhari are terrifying, not because they are powerful, though they are, not because they are cunning, though they are, but because what they want from you is not your death or your submission or your conversion to their cause. What they want is your pain, and they will go to any length, employ any technology, devise any strategy, and overcome any obstacle to get it. Beyond the three great pillars of cabals, witch cults, and homunculi covens, the Drukhari employ a variety of specialist troops and mercenaries that add additional layers of dread to their already terrifying military machine. These are the Blades for Hire, It's independent warriors and organizations that operate outside the formal structures of Drukhari society, but are indispensable to its functioning. The incubi are perhaps the most elite warriors in all of Commorragh. They are swordsmen without equal, mercenary blade masters who have dedicated their entire existence to the pursuit of perfection in personal combat. Unlike the Kabbalite warriors, who fight for a specific archon and are bound by the hierarchies and politics of their cabal, the incubi owe allegiance to no one but their own order. They are trained in dark shrines, obsidian-crafted fortresses that dot the landscape of Commorragh like black teeth, each one presided over by a hierarch and thronged by aspirants eager to learn the murderous arts. The training to become an incubus is brutal by any standard. Not every aspirant survives, and those who fail are burned as offerings to an iron statue of Cain, the Eldari god of war that stands at the heart of each shrine. Those who endure long enough to best a proven incubus and claim his armor face a final test that is as dark as it is demanding. They must track down and kill an aspect warrior of the craft world Eldari in single combat. Not just any kill, but a ritualized one. The aspirant must shatter their quarry's spirit stone, the precious soul gem that protects an Asuryani's spirit from Slanesh, and rebuild it into a psychic torture device called a tormentor, which is then incorporated into the incubus's distinctive helmet. Think about what that means. Every incubus you see on the battlefield has personally hunted and killed one of the craftworld Eldari's own elite warriors, and destroyed the one thing that kept their souls safe from the Dark Prince, and transformed it into a weapon of psychic torment. The tormentor built into their helm emits a constant low-level psychic interference that causes disorientation and fear in nearby enemies, a sound like a soul screaming in perpetual agony. The incubi fight with claves, great powered swords that are masterworks of balance and form. In the hands of a fully trained incubus, a clave can cut through ceramite, adamantium, and even the thickened hides of tyrannid bioforms with casual ease. Their leaders, known as clavexes, sometimes wield demiclaves, paired blades that can be used separately for rapid strikes or clasped together to form a single devastating weapon. Archons favor incubi as bodyguards because of a simple but elegant logic. In Drukhari society, where advancement comes through assassination, trusting your life to a member of your own cabal is foolish. Your bodyguard has every reason to let you die and claim your position. The incubi, being outside the cabal hierarchy entirely, have no such motivation. They follow the code of their contract with zealous precision, and their only loyalty is to their own order. This makes them the perfect protectors, impartial, incorruptible by the standards of Commorragh, and absolutely lethal. The origins of the incubi order are shrouded in mystery, but one persistent legend claims they were founded by Ara, the fallen phoenix lord of the striking scorpions, one of the greatest warriors the Eldari race has ever produced. If this is true, then the incubi represent a dark mirror of the craftworld aspect warriors, a martial tradition of equal skill and dedication, but oriented towards service, profit, and the perfection of the kill, rather than the defense of the Eldari people. There are whispers that Draja, the master of blades, the most feared incubus in all of Commorragh, may be Ara himself, still alive after all these millennia, though this cannot be confirmed. Then there are the scourges, Drukhari, who have voluntarily undergone the attentions of the homunculi to have their bodies modified for aerial combat. These warriors have had their bones hollowed out and reinforced with metal, their muscles enhanced for flight, and great wings of skin and bone grafted onto their backs. The process is agonizing, and not all who undergo it survive, but those who do emerge as the airborne elite of the Drukhari military, air capable of flying at high speeds while wielding heavy weapons that would normally require a vehicle mount to support. Scourges serve as the eyes and ears of a raiding force, soaring above the battlefield on their grafted wings, relaying tactical information and delivering devastating firepower from above. They are particularly fond of heat lances, compact weapons that concentrate thermal energy to a point that can melt through the thickest armor, and haywire blasters, devices that emit pulses of electromagnetic energy that can disable vehicles and cybernetic augmentations with a single shot. The Beastmasters of the witch cults add yet another dimension to the Drukhari's already diverse military. These are handlers of exotic creatures, many of which are not native to the galaxy and have been acquired through means that are best left unexplored. Clawed fiends, massive predators that can tear through armored vehicles with their talons. Razor-wing flocks, swarms of flying creatures with monomolecular wing edges that can slice through power armor like paper. Chimerae, shadowy warp beasts that exist partially in the Imperium and can phase through solid matter to strike at their targets from unexpected angles. Each of these creatures is controlled by a Beastmaster who rides on a flying platform called a skyboard, directing their charges with a combination of empathic control, stimulant injections, and good old-fashioned cruelty. On the battlefield, a pack of Drukhari beasts is a terrifying sight. A stampede of nightmares descending on the enemy line with tooth and claw and things that do not correspond to any category of natural weaponry. And finally, there are the Hellions, the sky gangs of the Middle Darkness. These are the Drukhari who exist outside the formal structures of the Cabals and the witch cults, too wild and independent to submit to anyone's authority. They ride skyboards, plank-like anti-gravity platforms that they control with a combination of weight shifting and neural interface, racing through the lower levels of Komarach at breakneck speeds, fighting, stealing, and generally making nuisances of themselves. During a real space raid, Hellion gangs can be recruited as auxiliary forces, their speed and aggression making them useful as scouts, flankers, and general agents of chaos. But each of these specialist elements adds something to the Drukhari's already formidable military capability. The Incubi provide elite shock troops, the Scourges provide airborne fire support, the Beastmasters provide exotic and unpredictable threats, the Hellions provide fast, aggressive harassment. Together with the Cabals, the witch cults, and the Homunculi covens, they form a military machine that is extraordinarily flexible, devastatingly effective, and specifically designed to accomplish the one objective that matters above all others: the acquisition of living captives. Let us now turn to the question that underlies everything we have discussed so far. What is it about the Drukhari that makes them uniquely terrifying in a galaxy that is already overflowing with horror? What separates them from the Tyranids who consume entire worlds? From the Necrons, who have the power to extinguish stars, from the forces of chaos, whose corruption can twist entire civilizations into screaming parodies of themselves? The answer, I believe, lies in the nature of their intent. Consider the Tyranids. They are terrifying, certainly. A Tyranid hive fleet is a galaxy-ending threat, a swarm of biological nightmares that strips worlds to their bedrock and moves on. But the Tyranids do not hate you. They do not want to hurt you. They want to consume you, certainly, but the consumption is impersonal. To a Tyranid, you are food. You have no more significance than a blade of grass to a grazing animal. There is a terrible purity to the Tyranid threat, a simplicity that, while horrifying, is at least comprehensible. They eat, you are eaten, that is the entire transaction. The Necrons are similarly impersonal. They are ancient, impossibly powerful, and they view the younger races of the galaxy with something between contempt and indifference. When a Necron dynasty awakens and begins to reclaim its former territory, the current inhabitants are simply swept aside, exterminated, efficiently, thoroughly, and without malice. A Necron overlord does not take pleasure in killing you any more than you take pleasure in sweeping dust from your floor. You are simply in the way, and you are removed. Even the forces of chaos, for all their corruption and their sadism, have an agenda beyond mere cruelty. Chaos wants to spread, to convert, to corrupt. A chaos warband that conquers a world does not simply torture its inhabitants for the sake of torture. It transforms them, twists them, makes them into something new, of something that serves the will of the ruinous powers. There is a purpose to the suffering, however twisted, and there is a theoretical end state, the complete domination of the galaxy by the forces of the warp. The Drukhari have no such agenda. They do not want to conquer the galaxy. They do not want to consume it or convert it or transform it. They want it to suffer. That is the beginning and end of their ambition. Every raid, every campaign, every political machination, every work of art, every technological innovation in Drukhari society is oriented toward a single goal: the extraction of suffering from the rest of the galaxy. They are not building toward anything. They are not working toward any ultimate objective. They are simply feeding, endlessly and insatiably, on the pain of others. This makes them uniquely personal. But when the Tyranids come for your world, you are one victim among millions, a statistic in a biological equation. When the Necrons come, you are an obstacle to be overcome. When chaos comes, you are a potential recruit. But when the Drukhari come, they are coming specifically for you, for the unique and irreplaceable experience of your suffering, for the specific quality of your screams, for the way your hope curdles into despair when you realize that no one is coming to save you, and that the thing standing over you with the flensing knife is going to take its time. There is another dimension to the Drukhari threat that is often overlooked in discussions of their military capabilities, and it is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all. The Drukhari are, in many ways, exactly what the Eldari were before the fall. They are the living, or breathing continuation of the civilization that destroyed itself through excess and gave birth to a god of hedonism. Where the craft welders chose to turn away from the path that led to the fall, where the Exodites chose to abandon technology and return to simpler ways, the Drukhari looked at the catastrophe that their behavior had caused and said, in effect, "We will continue exactly as we were, and we will make the rest of the galaxy pay the price." This means that the Drukhari are not merely dangerous aliens. They are a warning, a living demonstration of what happens when a civilization surrenders entirely to its worst impulses and refuses to acknowledge the consequences. They are what the human race could become if it followed the path of unchecked hedonism to its logical conclusion. And the fact that they are still here, are still thriving, still feeding on the galaxy after 10,000 years, suggests that the universe has no mechanism for punishing such behavior. There is no cosmic justice that will bring the Drukhari low. There is only the ongoing horror of their existence and the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness of the webway, they are waiting for their next meal. We have spoken of the Drukhari's origins, their city, their society, and the broad strokes of how they wage war. But there is another layer to their horror that we have not yet fully explored, and it concerns the technology they wield. Because the Drukhari are not merely cruel, they are brilliant, and their brilliance is directed, with laser focus, toward making their cruelty more effective. The Eldari, at the height of their empire, were the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. Their mastery of science and engineering was so complete that they could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe as casually as a human might flip a light switch. They could reshape planets. They could extinguish stars. They could create pocket dimensions and fold space and manipulate time in ways that even the Necrons, with their mastery of Gauss and phase technology, would find impressive. When the fall came and the Eldari civilization collapsed, most of this technology was lost. The craft welders, in their wisdom, abandoned much of it deliberately, recognizing that the pursuit of technological perfection had been part of what drove their species to ruin. They retained only what was necessary for survival and defense, and even that was treated with a reverence bordering on religious devotion, each piece of technology carefully maintained and used only when absolutely necessary. The Drukhari made no such sacrifice. In the webway, sheltered from the worst effects of the fall, they continued to develop and refine the technologies of the old empire. They had no reason to stop, no moral awakening, no spiritual crisis, no newfound humility to temper their appetites. They simply kept going, pushing their technology further and further, not in the pursuit of knowledge or understanding, but in the pursuit of more efficient ways to inflict suffering and sustain their own cursed existence. The result is that the Drukhari possess a technological base that is, in many respects, the most advanced in the galaxy. Their weapons, their vehicles, their medical technologies, and their means of traversing space are all products of a scientific tradition that predates the Imperium by millions of years and has been continuously refined throughout the 10,000 years since the fall. Where the Imperium struggles to maintain and replicate technologies that it no longer understands, the Drukhari are actively innovating, creating new weapons and new tools with a creativity that is as impressive as it is terrifying. Splinter weapons are a perfect example of this technological sophistication. On the surface, they appear simple, projectile weapons that fire shards of crystal. But the reality is far more complex. Each shard is a precisely engineered delivery system for a cocktail of psychoactive neurotoxins that have been refined over millennia of experimentation. The toxins are calibrated to the biology of the target species, with different formulations used for humans, orcs, Tau, and other commonly raided populations. The standard anti-personnel toxin is designed to overwhelm the nervous system without causing permanent damage, paralyzing the victim while leaving them fully conscious and able to feel pain. More exotic variants can induce hallucinations, amplify nerve sensitivity, or trigger specific emotional states such as terror or despair, all of which produce different qualities of suffering for the Drukhari to consume. The splinter weapons themselves are marvels of engineering. Splinter rifles, the standard arm of the Kabbalite warrior, use a magnetic acceleration system to fire their crystalline projectiles at hypersonic velocities. Splinter cannons, the heavy weapon variant, can sustain a withering rate of fire that shreds even heavily armored targets through sheer volume of impacts. Splinter pistols, carried as sidearms by virtually every Drukhari warrior, are compact enough to be wielded in one hand while the other holds a blade, allowing for the seamless integration of ranged and melee combat that is characteristic of the Drukhari fighting style. The true technological terror of the Drukhari arsenal, however, is darklight. This is the energy source that powers their heavy weapons, their vehicle-mounted armaments, and some of their most devastating strategic weapons, and it is something that Imperial science cannot even begin to replicate or understand. Darklight is believed to be harvested from the most extreme phenomena in the universe: black holes, warp storms, and other sources of cosmic destruction. Now, how the Drukhari extract and contain this energy is a mystery that has baffled Imperial scientists for millennia. What is known is that when darklight is released from its containment field and introduced into real space, the effects are catastrophic. A dark lance, the most common darklight weapon, fires a concentrated beam of this energy that annihilates anything it touches. It does not burn or melt or tear. It simply unmakes. The target ceases to exist. Its constituent matter dispersed into nothing. Armor thickness is irrelevant. Material composition is irrelevant. A dark lance can cut through the hull of a battle tank or the ceramite plate of a space marine's armor with equal ease because it is not interacting with the target's physical properties at all. It is interacting with the fundamental nature of matter itself. The blaster, a smaller and more portable version of the dark lance, is carried by Kabbalite specialists and can be fired while on the move, making it devastatingly effective during the fast-paced engagements that the Drukhari prefer. The blast pistol, smaller still, is a sidearm variant favored by officers and champions who want the ability to destroy a vehicle or a fortified position at close range without the encumbrance of a full-sized weapon. At the strategic level, the Drukhari deploy weapons that are even more frightening. The Void Mine, carried by the Void Raven bomber aircraft, is a device of nightmarish ingenuity. It detonates 2 warheads in rapid succession. The first establishes a sphere of force that contains everything within its radius. The second releases a particle of dark light from its containment field. Yes, the interaction of dark light with real space within the sealed sphere results in total annihilation. Everything within the sphere, air, earth, vehicles, personnel, everything, is simply erased, in total silence. From the outside, there is no explosion, no shockwave, no debris, just a sudden, perfect sphere of nothing where something used to be. The vehicles of the Drukhari are designed with a philosophy that is diametrically opposed to that of the Imperium. Where Imperial vehicles prioritize armor and durability, Drukhari vehicles prioritize speed and agility above all else. The Raider, the standard transport, is a sleek platform of bladed metal that moves so quickly that it is often nothing but a blur to the naked eye. It carries no meaningful armor because it does not need to. By the time an enemy gunner has identified the Raider, tracked it and fired, the Raider has already moved. Speed is its protection, and the Drukhari ride it with a reckless confidence that borders on insanity, standing upright on open decks at velocities that would reduce a human to jelly. The Ravager, the Drukhari's primary gunship, carries 3 dark lances or disintegrator cannons on a hull that is scarcely larger than a Raider. It is, pound for pound, one of the most destructive vehicles in the galaxy, capable of crippling a Land Raider or dropping a Lehman Russ with a single volley. And it does so while moving at speeds that make it almost impossible to hit with conventional weapons. The Venom, a smaller and faster transport, carries just a handful of warriors, but compensates with extraordinary maneuverability. Venoms are often used to deliver witch squads directly into close combat. Their anti-gravity drives, allowing them to navigate terrain that would be impassable for conventional vehicles, including the interiors of buildings, the corridors of space stations, and the tight confines of underground complexes. At the top of the Drukhari's vehicular arsenal sit their aircraft, the Razorwing jet fighter, an interceptor armed with a devastating array of missiles and darklight weapons, and the Void Raven bomber, a strike craft whose payload of void mines and implosion missiles can destroy entire formations in a single pass. These aircraft are faster than anything in the Imperial Navy's arsenal short of an actual fighter craft, and they are more maneuverable than anything of comparable speed. In aerial combat, they are nearly untouchable, and their weapons are capable of inflicting damage that is wildly disproportionate to their size. All of this technology serves a single purpose: to enable the Drukhari to strike fast, hit hard, take what they came for, and vanish before their enemies can mount an effective response. It is a military doctrine of perfected predation, refined over 10,000 years of continuous raiding, and it is extraordinarily difficult to counter. The Drukhari do not fight fair. They do not engage enemies who are prepared for them. They do not stand and trade blows in the manner of Imperial forces or orcs, or even the craft world Eldari. They appear, they strike, they take, and they are gone. And the technology they possess ensures that every step of this process is executed with a precision and lethality that most military forces cannot match. Whilst there is an aspect of the Drukhari that is often forgotten in discussions of their military prowess and their cruelty, and it is one that, in many ways, makes them even more terrifying than all the weapons and torture chambers and gladiatorial arenas combined. It is the simple, often overlooked fact that the Drukhari are, on an individual level, among the most intelligent and perceptive beings in the galaxy. The Eldari mind, as we discussed earlier, is a thing of extraordinary complexity. An Eldari thinks faster than a human, perceives more detail, processes information more efficiently, and experiences emotions with an intensity that makes human feelings seem pallid by comparison. This cognitive superiority applies to all branches of the Eldari species, but in the Drukhari, it has been honed by millennia of living in the most dangerous social environment imaginable. In Commorragh, intelligence is survival. Every interaction is a potential trap. Every alliance is a potential betrayal. Every word spoken may contain hidden meanings, subtle threats, or carefully veiled insults that could trigger a lethal response if interpreted correctly, and an even more lethal response if interpreted incorrectly. The Drukhari do not simply live in a state of constant vigilance. They live in a state of constant cognitive warfare, their minds running at full capacity at all times, analyzing, predicting, and manipulating the beings around them with a skill that would put the most accomplished human diplomat or spy to shame. An Archon who has survived for centuries in Commorragh has, by definition, outthought, outmaneuvered, and outlasted every rival who has ever challenged them. They have predicted assassinations before they were planned, turned allies into weapons, transformed disadvantages into opportunities, and navigated political landscapes of such Byzantine complexity that a human mind would simply shut down rather than attempt to process them. These are not merely cunning individuals. They are beings whose capacity for strategic thought operates on a level that is qualitatively different from human cognition, not just faster or more detailed, but structured around entirely different paradigms of analysis and prediction. This cognitive superiority extends to the battlefield. A Drukhari commander does not simply react to tactical developments. They anticipate them, often several moves ahead, and adjusting their strategy in real time with a fluidity that Imperial officers find deeply unsettling. Drukhari raids rarely go wrong because the intelligence gathering that precedes them is extraordinarily thorough. The planning is meticulous, and the execution is carried out by warriors who can assess and adapt to changing circumstances faster than their opponents can perceive them. Even a rank-and-file Kabbalite warrior possesses cognitive abilities that exceed those of all but the most enhanced humans. Their reaction times are faster, their spatial awareness is broader, and their capacity to track multiple targets simultaneously is substantially greater. In close combat, a Drukhari warrior moves with a speed and precision that seems almost prescient, just as if they are reading their opponent's intentions before those intentions have fully formed. This is not psychic ability. The Drukhari have deliberately suppressed their psychic potential to avoid attracting Slanesh's attention. It is simply the natural superiority of the Eldari mind, combined with a lifetime of training and the constant mortal pressure of living in a society where even a moment of inattention can be fatal. Now combine this cognitive superiority with the absence of empathy. The Drukhari are not merely intelligent predators. They are intelligent predators who feel no compassion, no mercy, no guilt, and no moral restraint of any kind. Their entire psychological framework is oriented toward the acquisition of power and the consumption of suffering, and their formidable intellects are bent entirely toward the achievement of these goals. An Archon plotting a raid does not weigh the moral implications of their actions. They weigh only the efficiency of the suffering that will be produced and the profit that will result. A homunculus designing a new torture technique does not consider the ethics of their work. They consider only the purity of the agony it will produce and the nourishment it will provide. This combination of supreme intelligence and complete moral void is what makes the Drukhari so frightening on a personal level. When you face a Drukhari, you are not facing a mindless beast, or a fanatical zealot, or a corrupted madman. You are facing a being that is smarter than you, faster than you, more perceptive than you, and completely, absolutely, terrifyingly indifferent to your suffering, except insofar as it can be harvested for their benefit. There is one more dimension to the Drukhari threat that deserves examination, and it is the dimension that ties everything we have discussed together into a single, coherent picture of horror. It is the question of scale. The Drukhari do not operate on the same timescale as humanity. They think in centuries and millennia where humans think in years and decades. An Archon who has been planning a particular raid for 50 years is, by Drukhari standards, rushing. Some schemes take centuries to come to fruition, with agents planted in target civilizations generations before the actual attack is launched, slowly manipulating events to create the conditions for maximum suffering when the hammer finally falls. There are Imperial worlds that have been raided by the Drukhari dozens of times over the course of their history, each raid separated by decades or centuries, each one striking at a different location or a different demographic, each one leaving behind survivors who will tell their children and grandchildren about the horrors they witnessed. These survivors become a form of psychological warfare in themselves, spreading fear and despair throughout the population, making the next raid more effective because the victims are already primed for terror before the first portal even opens. Some raids are not even aimed at capturing slaves. They are aimed at inflicting maximum psychological damage on the survivors, creating a population so traumatized, so broken by fear and grief, that they will produce a higher quality of suffering the next time the Drukhari return. These psychological raids are planned with the same meticulous attention to detail as a military operation, with mandrakes and other agents studying the target population for weaknesses, identifying the individuals whose suffering will have the greatest ripple effect, and designing the attack to exploit those weaknesses with surgical precision. The Drukhari have raided every species in the galaxy. Humans are their most common targets, simply because humans are the most numerous and the most accessible species in real space. But they have also raided orc settlements, Tau colonies, craft world Eldari outposts, and even Necron tomb worlds, though the latter tend to produce more casualties than captives. They have been known to raid worlds during natural disasters, during wars, during plagues, timing their attacks to coincide with periods of maximum vulnerability and maximum emotional distress. There are accounts of Drukhari raids targeting refugee convoys fleeing from war zones, striking at the most vulnerable people in the galaxy at the moment when they are least able to defend themselves. There are accounts of raids on medical facilities and field hospitals where the Drukhari specifically targeted the wounded and the sick, taking captives whose physical condition would make them more sensitive to the torments awaiting them in Commorragh. There are accounts of raids on religious pilgrimages, where the Drukhari exploited the pilgrims' faith to create a particularly potent form of despair, the agony of feeling that one's God has abandoned them in their hour of greatest need. No target is too small, no population is too insignificant, no world is too remote or too well defended. The Drukhari's mastery of the webway means that they can strike anywhere in the galaxy at any time, with virtually no warning. A world on the eastern fringe is no safer than a world in the heart of the segmentum solar. A fortress world bristling with orbital defenses is no more secure than an undefended agri-world, because the Drukhari do not approach through space. They step through a door that can open anywhere a shadow falls, and they are among you before you even know they are there. The Imperium has no effective counter to this. The Drukhari cannot be tracked because they travel through the webway. They cannot be predicted, because their targets are chosen based on criteria that human intelligence analysts cannot comprehend. They cannot be retaliated against, because Commorragh cannot be found, cannot be reached, and cannot be assaulted by any force in the Imperium's arsenal. The best that the Imperium can do is station additional forces on worlds that have been raided before, in the hope that a stronger garrison will deter future attacks. But the Drukhari are not deterred by strength. They are attracted to it, because a stronger garrison means a more challenging raid, and a more challenging raid means a more interesting hunt. This is the final, terrible truth about the Drukhari. They cannot be stopped. Not by walls, not by armies, not by fleets, not by the most powerful weapons in humanity's arsenal. The Imperium can fight the Tyranids. It can battle the forces of chaos, can wage war against the Orcs and the Necrons with at least the theoretical possibility of victory. But against the Drukhari, there is no victory. There is only survival. And even that is temporary. Because somewhere in the darkness of the webway, in a city powered by stolen suns and sustained by stolen screams, the Dark Eldar are always hungry, and the galaxy is their hunting ground. In the long history of encounters between the Imperium of man and the Drukhari, there have been moments that stand out as particularly illustrative of the Dark Eldar's nature. Not great battles or decisive engagements in the military sense, but incidents that reveal, in stark and terrible clarity, exactly what kind of enemy the Imperium is dealing with. Consider the fate of the world of Drenthal as a modest imperial colony on the edge of known space. Drenthal was not a world of particular strategic importance. It had no rare resources, no military installations, no significance in the grand strategic calculations of the Imperium. It was simply a place where people lived, a few 100,000 souls going about their business under the dim light of a cooling star. The Drukhari came for Drenthal, not because it was valuable, but because it was vulnerable. The webway portal that opened above the settlement's main agricultural district disgorged a raiding force of moderate size, perhaps a few thousand Kabbalite warriors, supported by a handful of witch cult elements and a small homunculi contingent. The planetary defense force, undermanned and under-equipped, was overwhelmed within hours. The Drukhari did not destroy the settlement. They did not burn the crops or demolish the buildings. They simply took the people, every last man, woman and child, loaded them onto their transports, and vanished back into the webway. When the Imperium finally sent a response force to investigate Drenthal's sudden silence, they found a world that was perfectly intact. The buildings still stood. The crops still grew in the fields. The livestock wandered freely through empty streets. But every human being on the planet was gone. Not dead. Gone. Taken. Spirited away to a place that no Imperial force could reach, to endure a fate that no Imperial document could adequately describe. This is the particular horror of a Drukhari raid. There are no bodies to bury, no ruins to rebuild, no heroic last stand to commemorate, just empty spaces where people used to be. And the knowledge that somewhere, in a city that exists between dimensions, those people are still alive, still suffering, and will continue to suffer for as long as the homunculi can sustain them, which, given the regenerative technologies at their disposal, could be a very, very long time. Or consider the events surrounding Vekt's rise to power, a series of maneuvers so audacious that they have become legend, even among the Drukhari themselves. When Vekt wished to destroy the noble houses that opposed his rise, he did not challenge them directly. He was, at that time, merely the leader of one cabal among many, and a direct confrontation would have been suicidal. Instead, he orchestrated an invasion. Vekt deliberately provoked the Imperium of man by launching a series of escalating raids against the human-settled worlds of the Desiderian system. He captured a strike cruiser belonging to the Salamander's Space Marines, one of the Imperium's most formidable warrior chapters, and allowed the Imperium to track its location back to a webway portal. The Imperial response was exactly what Vekt had anticipated, a full-scale retaliatory invasion of Komorragh, led by vengeful Space Marines backed by elements of the Imperial Navy. Vekt then maneuvered his noble enemies into the path of the invading forces. The noble houses, occupying the regions of Komorragh closest to the breached portal, bore the full brunt of the Imperial assault, while Vekt and his forces watched from a safe distance. The Space Marines, burning with righteous fury, they tore through the noble houses with the efficiency that only the Emperor's finest warriors can achieve. By the time the Drukhari defenders managed to rally and push the invaders back, the noble houses were shattered beyond recovery. Vekt emerged from the chaos with his power base intact, his rivals eliminated, and his reputation as the most cunning strategist in Komorragh firmly established. He had used the Imperium of Man, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, as a tool to achieve his personal political objectives, and the Imperium had never even realized it was being manipulated. This is the level of strategic thinking that the Drukhari are capable of. They do not merely fight their enemies, they orchestrate them. They turn their opponents into weapons and aim those weapons at other targets. Yet they create situations so complex and so layered that even the most astute observers cannot see the full picture until it is far too late. In the current era, the time known as the Era Indomitus, the Drukhari remain as active and as dangerous as ever. The opening of the Great Rift, the massive warp storm that has split the galaxy in two, has created unprecedented opportunities for raiding. Worlds that were once protected by the psychic light of the Astronomicon now lie in darkness, cut off from Imperial reinforcement and communication. For the Drukhari, this is a feast beyond anything they have experienced in millennia. Reports of Drukhari raids have increased dramatically since the opening of the rift. Entire subsectors have gone dark, their populations vanished without a trace. Even worlds on the Imperium side of the rift are not safe, as the disruption to warp travel has made it increasingly difficult for the Imperial Navy to respond to attacks in a timely manner. By the time a response force arrives, the Drukhari are long gone, their webway portals sealed behind them, leaving nothing but empty streets and blood-stained silence. Commorragh itself has not been unaffected by the turmoil of the Era Indomitus. The disjunction caused by the partial awakening of Iniad threw the Dark City into chaos, opening tears in the fabric of reality that allowed demonic forces to pour into the webway. The ensuing civil war saw districts destroyed, alliances shattered, and the balance of power in Commorragh fundamentally reshaped. Vect, as always, emerged from the crisis with his power enhanced rather than diminished, and having used the chaos to eliminate remaining rivals and consolidate his already formidable position. The rise of the Inari, the followers of the Eldari god of the dead who seek to destroy Slaanesh through the awakening of Iniad, has introduced yet another complication into the political landscape of Commorragh. Some Drukhari have been drawn to the Inari's message, seeing in it a potential escape from the curse of Slaanesh that has driven their species to such terrible extremes. But Vect views the Inari as a direct threat to his power, since a Drukhari population freed from the need to consume suffering would have no reason to tolerate his rule. He has instigated a crackdown on Inari sympathizers within the Dark City, and the resulting conflict has only added to the already considerable violence of Commorrite society. Even Lilith Hesperax, the most famous succubus in the galaxy, has aligned herself with the Inari, though her motivations appear to be characteristically self-serving. Her primary interest is reportedly the capture of Lucius the Eternal, the Slaaneshi champion whose curse prevents him from being permanently slain. Lilith apparently believes that a duel with such an opponent would be the ultimate test of her skills, and the greatest spectacle the arenas of Commorragh have ever witnessed. The galaxy is changing. The Great Rift has altered the strategic landscape in ways that no one fully understands. The return of the Primarch Raboot Guilliman and the launching of the Indomitus Crusade have given the Imperium new purpose and new strength. But none of these developments have diminished the threat posed by the Drukhari. If anything, though they have enhanced it. The more chaos in the galaxy, the more suffering there is to harvest. The more worlds that fall into darkness and despair, the richer the hunting grounds become. The Drukhari are eternal. They have existed for 10,000 years, and they will exist for 10,000 more. They do not age, so long as they can feed. They do not die, so long as the Homunculi can rebuild them. They do not weaken, because every battle makes them stronger, every raid replenishes them, every scream sustains them. They are the galaxy's nightmare made flesh, a civilization built on suffering and sustained by suffering, and they will endure for as long as there are living beings in the galaxy capable of feeling pain. As we draw toward the end of this journey through the shadows of the Drukhari, there is one last subject that deserves our attention. And it is the subject that perhaps best captures the essential tragedy that lies at the heart of this faction's lore. Because for all their horror, for all their cruelty, for all the unimaginable suffering they inflict on the galaxy, the Drukhari are also, in their own terrible way, victims. This is not an attempt to excuse their behavior. Nothing can excuse what the Drukhari do. But understanding the forces that drive them adds a dimension of complexity to their characterization that elevates them from simple villains into something more nuanced and more disturbing. The Drukhari did not choose their fate. No individual Drukhari woke up one day and decided that they wanted to spend their existence torturing other sentient beings. The curse of Slaanesh, the slow drain on their souls that forces them to feed on suffering or die. What was inflicted upon them by the actions of their ancestors, beings who died 10,000 years ago in the cataclysm of the fall. Every Drukhari alive today is paying the price for sins committed by people who have been dead for millennia, trapped in a cycle of cruelty that they cannot escape without dying. Some Drukhari are aware of this. Beneath the hedonism and the sadistic arrogance, some members of this species understand that their way of life is fundamentally futile and self-destructive. They know that they are trapped, caught between a god that hungers for their souls and a survival instinct that demands they continue feeding, even though each feeding only deepens their dependence on suffering and further erodes whatever remains of their capacity for anything other than cruelty. A few manage to escape. There are Drukhari who have grown disillusioned with the endless cycle of raiding and torture and have sought refuge among the craft world Eldari, submitting to the discipline of the path in an attempt to free themselves from the hunger that defines their kind. These defectors are rare, and they are viewed with deep suspicion by their craft world hosts, but they exist. They are living proof that the curse of Slaanesh is not absolute, that the Drukhari are not inherently evil, and that another way of life is at least theoretically possible. But for the vast majority of the population of Commorragh, there is no escape. The social structures of the Dark City are designed to prevent it. The political systems are built to punish it. The entire weight of 10,000 years of tradition and culture presses down on every individual, demanding conformity to a way of life that is, at its core, a desperate attempt to outrun death. The Drukhari are a society in the grip of addiction, and their drug is suffering. They know that their behavior is destroying them, that each generation is a little more hollow, a little more desperate, a little further from anything that could be called truly alive. But they cannot stop. The alternative is oblivion. This is perhaps the most disturbing thing about the Drukhari. Not that they are evil. Evil is common enough in the 41st millennium, but that they are evil because they believe they have no choice. They are trapped in a prison of their own making, or rather a prison made by their ancestors and inherited by every generation since, and the walls of that prison are closing in. Slaanesh will not stop hungering. Us, the Drukhari, will not stop feeding, and the galaxy will not stop suffering. It is an equation with no solution and no end, a perfect cycle of cruelty that perpetuates itself across the millennia with the mechanical precision of a clock counting down to a doom that never quite arrives. The Inari offer a potential way out, a path to salvation through the awakening of Iniad, the Eldari god of the dead, who might have the power to challenge Slaanesh and free the Eldari species from the curse that has defined their existence since the fall. But the Inari path is uncertain, untested, and deeply controversial. Many Drukhari view it with suspicion or outright hostility, seeing in it either a false hope or a direct threat to the power structures that keep Commorragh functioning. Vect, who has the most to lose from any fundamental change in Drukhari society, has made it his mission to suppress the Inari movement within the Dark City, and his resources are virtually limitless. Whether the Inari will ultimately succeed in their mission is a question that the lore of Warhammer 40,000 has not yet answered. But the mere existence of the possibility adds a poignant dimension to the Drukhari story. They are a species standing at a crossroads, one path leading to continued suffering and slow spiritual death, the other leading to an uncertain redemption that would require them to fundamentally rethink everything they have been for the last 10,000 years. The fact that the vast majority of them will choose the familiar path of cruelty over the uncertain path of change is both deeply human and deeply tragic. So let us return to the question we asked at the beginning of this journey. Just how terrifying are the Dark Eldar, really? The answer, I hope, is now clear. The Drukhari are terrifying not because of any single attribute, but because of the way all of their attributes combine into something greater than the sum of its parts. They are a species that is individually superior to humans in virtually every measurable way. Faster, stronger, smarter, more perceptive, and possessed of a technological base that makes the Imperium's most advanced weapons look like toys. They inhabit a fortress that cannot be found, cannot be reached, and cannot be assaulted. They have mastered the art of war to a degree that makes their raids practically undefendable, and they have had 10,000 years to refine their methods. But all of this would make them merely dangerous, and there are plenty of dangerous factions in the 41st millennium. What makes the Drukhari terrifying is their intent. They do not come for your world. They do not come for your resources. They do not come for your allegiance. They come for your pain, for the unique and specific quality of your suffering. And they will take it with a precision and a thoroughness that leaves nothing behind but the haunting certainty that it will happen again. They are the predators that your predators have nightmares about, the monsters that hide in the shadows of a galaxy that is itself one vast shadow, the whisper in the dark that tells you, in a voice like silk drawn across a razor, that there are indeed fates worse than death, and you are about to experience every last one of them. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and the laughter of thirsting gods, the Drukhari are the proof that the universe has a sense of humor, and the joke is always at your expense. And on that deeply unsettling note, we reach the end of our journey into the world of the Dark Eldar. I hope you found this exploration as fascinating as it was disturbing, and I hope it has given you a deeper appreciation for one of the most uniquely horrifying factions in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of the Drukhari, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. We cover all manner of Warhammer 40k topics here, from the deepest lore to the most obscure corners of the setting, and every subscription helps us continue making content like this. Until next time, keep your lights on, stay out of the shadows, and whatever you do, do not answer if something whispers your name from the darkness. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Stay safe out there.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.